Hello, everyone, and welcome. Bonjour tout le monde. My name is Irina Kostko, and I'm the president of the McGill Women's Alumni Association. It is so wonderful to have you all here today for this special homecoming event. Before we get into our featured discussion with Diane Howard, I would like to say a few words about the McGill Women's Alumni Association, or for short, MWAA. Every woman who graduates from McGill is a member of MWAA. McGill Women's Alumni Association has been here for more than 130 years, and we were founded in 1888 by first 8 young women graduates. Since then, the association has grown and flourished and proudly passes the torch to women empowerment from generation to generation. Our mission is to advance the leadership potential of McGill Women's graduates by connecting and inspiring them. The McGill Women's Mentorship Program, launched in 2021 by MWAA, is an excellent example of McGill women graduates helping each other. The MWAA also has a long history of supporting women studying at McGill through scholarships, bursaries, fellowships, and graduation prizes. Annually, we give more than $60,000 in awards and to current McGill students. And to date, we have given awards to more than 2,000 outstanding young women. This year, MWAA has laid ground to a new scholarship to help McGill women students who study in STEM sector, in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We are very grateful to everyone who has helped us to raise the funds. In addition to supporting current students, throughout the year, we organize inspiring talks and workshops on topics such as career advancement and financial planning. Our signature networking events are, of course, Annual General Meeting, Roscoe Lecture, Toolbox Series, and of course, we participate in McGill's Homecoming annually. To kick off today's homecoming event, we are going to hear a brief recorded message from the new chair of McGill's Board of Governors, Maryse Bertrand. She has served in various roles on the board since 2016, including as a vice chair. Maryse Bertrand stepped into the role of the chair of Board of Governors this past July. Maryse is a business advisor and corporate director, sitting on boards of top companies like the National Bank of Canada, Metro, Gildan, and PSP. Previously, Maryse was a senior executive at CBC. She is a graduate of McGill's Faculty of Law and was awarded the distinction of Advocatus Emeritus by the Quebec Bar in recognition of exceptional contribution to the practice of law. She also holds a Master of Science in Risk Management from New York University Stern School of Business. Let's watch her message.
Hello everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. C'est un plaisir d'avoir l'opportunité de parler avec vous aujourd'hui. I would like to salute the McGill Women's Alumni Association for the important work it does in supporting women, both graduates of McGill and current students. We all need networks of support in school, in our careers, in life, and you're continuing this great legacy of the first 8 women to graduate from McGill in 1888 who formed the MWAA. I'd like to congratulate the MWAA on being honored at the McGill Alumni Association's Honors and Awards Banquet in June with the Charles H. Peters Alumni Group of the Year Award. Your fundraising campaign to mark the association's 130th anniversary was a huge success and led to the creation of an endowed scholarship to benefit women in STEM studies at McGill. Merci pour tout le bon travail que vous faites pour soutenir les futures femmes leaders dans leur parcours professionnel. En tant qu'avocate, j'ai apprécié les mentors qui ont contribué à me guider dans ma carrière et je sais combien ce soutien est important pour les jeunes diplômés qui commencent leur carrière. I'm a McGill Law alumna and proud to be a member of the MWAA. Thank you for all that you do in support of women at McGill, and once they've left our campuses and embarked on their career paths, women are important catalysts for change in their professional lives, and I know you're all eager to hear from an impressive changemaker in today's talk. So enjoy the discussion with McGill alumna Diane Howard and have a great time at homecoming, reconnecting with friends, former classmates, and the university. Merci et bonne retrouvailles à tous.
Merci Maryse pour ces mots et nos félicitations pour votre nouveau poste de présidente du Conseil des gouverneurs de l'Université McGill. And now I would like to call on MWAA Honorary President and the moderator of today's event, the Honourable Eleni Bakopanos. Eleni is a proud McGillian. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in History and Political Science with honors from McGill University, where she also studied law. At McGill, Eleni held the position of Senior Director for Government Relations. The Honourable Eleni Bakopanos was first elected as a Member of Parliament in 1993 and was then re-elected several times. During 13 years as a member of Canadian Parliament, Eleni held a number of parliamentary roles, including Assistant Deputy Speaker and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. Eleni Bakopanos presently serves as a director on a number of governmental and non-for-profit boards. She is presently the Vice President of the Canadian Association of Former Parliamentarians, member of the Privy Council of Canada, past chair of the National Board of Directors of Equal Voice, whose mission is to elect more women at all levels of government. She is also the honorary president of MWAA. She is the public policy analyst, political media commentator, mentor, and public speaker. Welcome, Eleni.
Thank you so much, Irina. Bonjour à tout le monde, et c'est vraiment un plaisir pour moi d'être la modératrice aujourd'hui. C'est un grand plaisir quand même d'accueillir Dr. Diane Howard. Je lui donne le titre de docteur parce qu'elle le mérite. Elle a quand même un PhD de McGill. I'm really, really pleased and proud to be able to be your moderator today. I'd like to say a few words first before I introduce our honored guest about the format of today's discussion. I will be in a conversation with Diane. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please use the chat feature on your device. And I hope we'll have lots of questions for this very, very interesting discussion with alumni Diane Howard, who's a leader, by the way, in her field. And hopefully there'll be lots of questions. We will do about a half an hour with Diane doing introductory remarks. Then we'll go to my questions to Diane, and then I will choose questions from the chat. I'll try to be able to answer all your questions. We have about an hour and a few minutes after an hour. I'm so thrilled to have Diane with us today. And I love your pink hair, Diane. And it is breast cancer month for those who don't know. And I love it. It suits you so much. So Diane has carved a very impressive career in a fascinating area. And I have to say, when I was younger, Diane, I was a Star Trek fan. I always thought I would be an astronaut one day, but that's not where my path took me. But your journey certainly brought you a lot closer than my journey. The space sector. She earned a master's and doctorate degrees in air and space law at McGill. She's a world-renowned legal scholar in the space sector and served as chief counsel for space commerce at the US Department of Commerce. She's now director of commercial space policy at the National Space Council, which is the White House Policy Council. Diane has also developed and taught courses, at various universities and served in senior executive positions at the International Institute of Space Law. Welcome, Diane. Bienvenue. It is so nice to meet you, as I said again, virtually. So I look forward to your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Eleni. Bonjour all, and merci beaucoup. And thank you for your wonderfully kind remarks. Also, it's an incredible pleasure and honor to be invited to speak with all of you today. McGill has a profound place in my journey, and I have to give a call out to my first space law professor is actually on this call. I see Marie-Lucie Stoyak, so thank you so much for being here. If I am a leading scholar, it's likely because I've had such incredible professors. And so it really is a wonderful thing to be able to speak to you about my interesting career path and my life journey. I don't know that I'm going to fill up 30 minutes with my introductory remarks, so I think we're going to have a lot of time for wonderful and synergistic conversation. But before I begin, I have to caveat my remarks with this. Today, I'm speaking in my personal capacity. So the perspectives that I'm sharing with you are mine and mine alone. It's necessary for me to begin that. I do have a super cool job, but I have to let you know that my point of view is very well aligned with the people that I work with and for, but these are my remarks. So the bottom line up front is that the opportunities for women have opened up to some degree and in many places, but we clearly have more work to do. So I grew up in the 60s. It was a tumultuous time. It was a polarizing time. Not that today is not. Today, we have tools that help us manage our time differently. Things that give us much broader reach and touch like this, being able to speak in a forum like this with people without, even having to upset or disturb the rhythms of our daily lives. The internet is a wonderful connector, but we have to really be vigilant in building and preserving the human side of our relationships with one another, but also with ourselves. And I think that's what I'd like to share with you today, with each other, but also with ourselves. So we're going to have a conversation, and I am sure that some of the facts of my interesting life will surface, and I am blessed, and I know it. But there are nuggets that I do hope that you will take from this time that we share together. First, life and opportunity are not always linear. Sometimes you get where you want circuitously. So I have found that for me, my choices work out better when I use my moral compass and I stay engaged with the signals and the indicators that are right there in my immediate environment. That's kind of how serendipity presents. So to sort of sum that up, the moral compass piece, I would say know your heart and use your mind. And then for that, staying engaged with what's immediately before you, what the universe puts in front of you, respond to opportunities, show up all the way. Embrace serendipity, the things that are unexpected. That's why sometimes, it doesn't work out exactly the way you envisioned or wanted it to. But if you embrace those opportunities and you show up all the way, sometimes it works out better than you could possibly have imagined. And at the end, always help one another. And that's pretty much what I've got to start with. I think it'll be a whole lot more interesting if we do have a conversation. I have learned from many years in the classroom that when I transmit, it's never as good as when we have interactive dialogue. So with that, I think in the Zoom parlance of today, I'm going to say over.
Thank you so much, Diane. That was very interesting. I love the word serendipity, because I remember when we first communicated, you said you were living your dream and it was a tale of serendipity. Right. I didn't mention earlier in your bio how this road less traveled by many people started, but you started out in the fashion industry, which I found fascinating. And I'm wondering how you went from being a fashion model, being in that industry and everything that comes with it, to actually deciding on a law career, and then obviously to your educational path to our alma mater, McGill. So it would be interesting to see how did that, what was the process by which you decided that you didn't want to stay in the fashion industry, but wanted to, in fact, pursue a career in law, and then, of course, a specialty of space law itself.
Well, that is a really great opening for serendipity. So we really have to go back before the fashion career, which I sort of fell into, completely without trying. But I joined the Navy when I was a theater major in university, and went to New York. Obviously didn't become famous for that. And through some stops and starts, I joined the Navy. I joined the Navy because it had an aviation piece, and I had fallen in love with space as a very young girl. I mentioned that I was a child of the 60s, and my family moved from New York City to Central Florida and then eventually Miami Beach when I was quite young. And it was during the early days of Mercury and Gemini. So, you know, my first and second grade teachers would trot us out and we would look up at the sky and see the contrails. And then, you know, you kind of superimpose that upon hiding under your desk because of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was just 90 miles offshore. So, you know, very early on, space good, terrestrial not as good. I kind of got that. So I had always harbored this you know, love of science and of space, but the opportunities were not as wonderful. So I joined the Navy thinking, you know, maybe I could break through that glass ceiling, but no. They kind of dashed my hopes. You know, I wore glasses and, you know, I hadn't, you know, I didn't know how to fly, you know, minor details. And at that point, you know, they had just begun letting women train to be pilots in the military. They, you know, that was something that was prevalent and relied upon during World War II, but then it kind of went to sleep after World War II. And that had just begun. So I ended up working for the legal officer on the base, and I loved it. And I just basically, you know, set up his files and dealt with the, you know, the military law is a little bit different than regular civilian law, but it was like a taste. But then, you know, life kind of takes over, and I got married, I got pregnant, I got out of the military. I had and I unfortunately was a widow very young, and so I had this lovely daughter, and I ended up kind of falling into this fashion career without even trying. I remarried, and my sister-in-law was a model, and she was like, "Oh, you should come with me because that way we can carpool." So you know, I kind of, you know, tabled all this other stuff and got really involved in that, and it was a wonderful opportunity because I you know, first worked for a company, a very well-known company, Speedo, and helped them develop a fitness line because I was a workout buff, and that was very interesting, and then helped take them public. So I learned an awful lot about investment. And that's what I mean. You embrace the opportunities that are right in front of you, because I learned so much. I never said, "Oh, gee, this isn't what I want to do."
But incredible opportunities. And so you went with the flow, as you said earlier, from
absolutely.
the Navy
go with
to
the flow. Absolutely. Yeah. So that worked for a while. Wait, but there's more. So, you know, the serendipity piece of how do you get from fashion to law. I always loved the law, and I had, you know, this sort of, I didn't know how I was going to get from one point to the next point. And when, you know, things started to change in my personal life. My dad was not well. My daughter and her stepdad were not getting along. And I kind of had an epiphany. I said, you know, life is short. And I was a daughter and a mother and a wife before I was a fashion executive. And so I made a difficult choice. I just quit. Wow. And I wasn't sure what to do with myself. I was kind of betwixt and between. But I knew that I wanted to do something more. I felt like I wanted to be a part of a bigger set of issues than what, you know, line we were going to put together for spring or summer and cruise. And I didn't just want to be in service of, you know, the almighty dollar. I wanted it to kind of, I wanted to do something that hooked up to a greater good. Interestingly enough, right around that time, my aunt, who had no children and we'd always been close, she took ill. And she knew that she had a limited amount of time. Her husband also was not well. And she said, "Here's the deal, Diane. I'm going to give you the money to go back to school. You've never lived up to your potential," which was true. And she said, "So you can figure out what you want to do. I'm going to put this in a trust so you don't even have to go through probate. And you're on the honor system because I'm not going to be here, but I'll haunt you if you don't do it." I said, "Well, I want to go to law school. That's why I wanted." And she said, "Here." And she held true to this. So there's some more serendipity. So at that point, now I'm like morally obligated to really like, wow, somebody just offered me this second chance. So I knew I wanted to give it my all. And I thought I would be an environmental lawyer because I thought this is a way to give back. So that was my thing. That was my jam. I was going to be an environmental lawyer, and I was waiting for parts for my car. And a guy just asked me, well, what do you do? We were waiting a long time. I said, I'm going to start law school next week. Oh, what kind of law do you want to practice? I said, I want to be in environmental law. I want to do something for the greater good. This is a while ago. This guy said, well, you really should look into space law. I'm like, He goes, yeah, we're really messing up space. You want to talk about an environment that needs help before it's too late. And I said, you space, like Star Trek. He goes, And I thought he was kind of okay. So when I went to the university, to the law school a couple of days later, and they asked me if I wanted to look something up, I said, yeah, I want to look up the Outer Space Treaty. No, I didn't know about the Outer Space Treaty. I want to look at space law. I wasn't even sure it existed. And they found me the Outer Space Treaty, and it was everything. But, I got a terrestrial law job, and I knew that this was something I wanted to do someday. While I was still in law school, I learned that there was a program at McGill, a summer program that was, I think it was put together by Tulane University, if I'm not mistaken. And I know Lucy can correct me if I'm wrong. But it was like you got a week of space law, down and dirty, everything you can possibly remember in a week. And I was just like, it was everything I thought it would be. And so I remember Lucy saying, you really ought to pursue this. And I went back to my day job, which was working for an appellate judge. And well, actually not yet. I graduated from law school, and I ended up going to a number of different conferences and things. And one of them, again, was at McGill. And I remember it was about the Moon Agreement. And I sat in the back, and I didn't want to say anything. I was just soaking it all up like a sponge. And I realized, wow, life is short, and I'm not getting any younger. This is a second career for me. And if I'm going to do this, I better do this soon. So I went back and I gave the judge notice, and I just said, I'm going to apply to McGill. I'm going to see if I get into the LLM program. And I did. So that is how I got from the Navy to the fashion industry, and from the fashion industry to law, and from law to McGill and space law. Okay. Long answer.
No, it's a perfect answer, because it actually elaborates on why it was serendipity, exactly why your life was serendipity. But also you looked for purpose in your life, which I find also very important. Was your experience at McGill, can you elaborate a little bit on experience? I mean, we love our alma mater, and I'm a big fan of McGill. My daughter and my husband were both graduates of McGill also. But was there something special about McGill? I know the program was unique, so I'm not going to ask you why McGill. Perhaps there were other universities, but why McGill? Let's ask that question. Why McGill? And what was your experience in terms of McGill?
McGill was transformative. So first of all, I'm dual. My mother was born in Canada, and I have dual citizenship. And I'd spent a little bit of time in Canada as a youngster, but to come back as a full-blown adult and to be exposed to so many different kinds of people. And it really is a very diverse and very vibrant and very intellectual community. And it was transformative. I had been educated in the US, so I was rather US centric in a lot of my baseline assumptions. And being at McGill and being in a class, I think it was the largest class that the Institute of Air and Space Law ever had. So we had 25 people in our cohort, which is quite, and they were from everywhere, from Nepal to Taiwan to Mexico to Russia to from everywhere. And also a number of different ages. Some people were practitioners, some were fresh out of law school. So myself, I was a returning student as well. So it was a real diverse population from a demographic standpoint, from an educational standpoint, and it was fantastic. It also was my first real exposure to public international law. So prior to that, it's a lot of my law schools, it was skewed toward being a practitioner, being a lawyer, a litigator, primarily. That was pretty much where a lot of their focus was. So to be exposed, particularly through a lot of McGill has incredible gravitas in the world community. And so through that, to be exposed and able to participate in some international fora that would not have been available to me any other way were transformative. Absolutely.
That's wonderful. I know time is running and I can't see the chat room, but I hope there will be questions by all our participants. Please feel free to put your questions to Diane. Diane, I mean, you faced many challenges. You talked at the beginning at the Navy that there were very few women pilots. Right. And then in your field right now, there are very few women. And this year, as you heard earlier, we celebrate the MWAA, celebrate our 130th anniversary by beginning a scholarship for women, young women or students who are in the STEM disciplines. Do you still see the same challenges that you faced, that young women are facing today? And how did you deal with them, that perhaps there are some key points and key advice that you can give some of these young women that are participating or listening, or even help the MWAA help them in terms of getting through their career besides providing just money for them?
Well, yes, I do think that we have heightened awareness, and we're talking about things in much more open fora, and we have all kinds of people talking about them. So I think those are positives. That's a good thing. Do I think we're all the way there? No. I think, you know, a lot of times, particularly in the space community, you have to work to try to get equal representation, even on a panel. And I will tell you that we here at National Space Council have made not just space STEM, not just the science, technical, engineering, and math, although they're important, but also the STEM enabling disciplines. And I include policy and law in those STEM enabling disciplines, but also the workforce. So, you know, space has an incredible ability to inspire, and you know, it's some of the courses that you have to take are difficult. So that inspiration really is like a locomotive, like an engine that keeps you going when things are tough and you have to say, no, I'm not going out with my friends. I'm going to stay here and I'm going to study. But I think you need to open up the way we understand, you know, what these different fields that can give you a point of entry into space or into science, technical engineering, and mathematical fields. I think there's also now much more of an understanding and appreciation for the benefits to interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary education, for all the reasons that diversity is good and all of those benefits. So too do those same diversity of thought benefits accrue when you have a number of different disciplines working on a problem. And that goes for a classroom, but it certainly goes for anything in the workplace. I know that a lot of the work in the US government is done through committee and through working groups. It's pretty much that way at the international level as well. And having people from very diverse, you know, equities and interests there hashing it out, it's difficult, but it's messy, it's complicated, but at the end of the day, you come up with something that's far more robust. So I think we're not all the way there, like I said earlier, but I think that we all need to keep doing what we're doing. And again, I think we need to expand our understanding of how women can find their footing in things that have been heretofore traditionally more male-oriented. Don't give up. That, you know, there are other points of entry. We're starting to understand that even, like, you know, the 4-year degree is not the only path to get into some of these fields. That, you know, if we really want to be inclusive, we have to be inclusive in ways that bring people in that have different financial or economic backgrounds and different things at their standpoint. So I think, you know, this kind of diversity idea and different points of entry, I think, is something that is always very useful.
Well, you talked earlier about multidisciplinary type of approach. Yeah. And we see it even in the business community, where people are even hiring BAs, bachelor's degree graduates with philosophy to bring into a company another way of looking, especially after we lived through the pandemic. Of course, the workforce and the workplace has changed totally. So it's rather interesting. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how space law, and especially space commerce law, Give us some ideas of what it's like, because I think most of us would be very ignorant in terms of knowing, but give us a concrete example of what you would deal with in your typical, well, there is no typical day for you, but in a certain day.
I think if I share a few of the things that I'm
Yeah.
working on in my portfolio,
Yes.
it might be helpful. So, you know, first and foremost, I consider myself an international space lawyer, but I do have, I have spent a lot of time working on issues that pertain to the private sector, commercial community, which is not as clear a line of demarcation as it once was. So, and I think one of the reasons I was attracted to working with the private sector in space initially was because they reminded me of some of like the little skateboard and surf shops that I dealt with when I was in the fashion industry, which were always my favorites. They were the entrepreneurs. They were the creatives, the people with the really kind of off ideas, but every now and then something would just take off. And so that is interested in me. So what I work on primarily, it's not just, oh, gee, how can we make more money? It's also how can we find that balance point between allowing a very diverse private sector in the US, but also all around the world. It's, you know, we live in a global community, particularly with space. So finding that sweet spot between allowing innovation to bubble up and do wonderful things, which benefit all of us and create economic, drivers, opportunities, and stability. But how do we balance that with what we know to be necessary in space? And that's responsible conduct in space. So when I first got involved back, well, I think I took Lucy's class in 2003, if I'm not mistaken. So I think I started really researching in like 1999, and I started writing all my papers in law school about space law early in those days. The private sector's relationship with the government was primarily as a contractor. So you had a big defense industrial base. They met with they worked to satisfy the requirements, the procurement requirements to be defense contractors or work for a space agency, a NASA or Canadian Space Agency. And then in the early 2000s, it started to change. We had Ansari X Prize. There were a lot of different technologies that were coming online. So, people were trying to really crack the code for reusability with launch. And so they were like, this entrepreneurial community had begun. That has really continued in the last 20 years. So now we have constellations, very, very large constellations, of very small satellites. We have a much different low Earth orbit than we had at one time. It's far more congested. So the traffic, how we decongest or deconflict. And then we've also had some very profoundly transformative debris causing incidents. 2007, we had an ASAT test by China. We've had an Indian ASAT test since. We had an event at the US, which was not an ASAT test. It was to bring something down that could have been extremely disastrous had it come through an uncontrolled reentry because of the hydrazine that was on board. And then we had the Indian, and then most recently last year, we had the Russian ASAT test. So these things have created a much more complicated situation, particularly in low Earth orbit. So I work on space traffic coordination issues. I was working on that when I was at the Department of Commerce, helping transition the provision of warnings and information to private sector and also international users from what is now, it's now provided by the Department of Defense, and they provide more information than anybody in the world, to the whole world, about where things are in relationship to one another, active to active, but also with regard to debris. That's being transitioned to the Department of Commerce, and that will free the Department of Defense up. Plus, this is something that's really not it's not a national security function to provide that to the world to help with spaceflight safety. So even though it sounds a little more, it's not just making money, but it has a very profound effect on our ability to use space as for the private sector to use it for economic opportunity and development. But it also has provided a fantastic marketplace for private companies to develop capabilities. So they're actually, in some ways, providing even better analytics in real time than the Department of Defense, because they're not hampered by old hardware, and they don't have, you know, the sensitivity of some of the information that they're sharing. So that is something that I work on. Another thing that I'm working on, which definitely deals with the private sector and commerce, is back to the Outer Space Treaty. That's like the beginning of every conversation and the end of every conversation in my book. So there is an article in the Outer Space Treaty that basically it was a negotiated article back in the early 1960s, and at that time, the U.S. was already seeing private sector involvement in telecommunications. And so the U.S. was like, you know, no, we need to allow non-governmental entities to do stuff in space. So this wasn't, you know, going over so well with our colleagues in the Soviet Union. So what do you do when you have to get consensus? Is you talk it out. And so they came to a sort of a compromise. And the compromise was, non-governmental activities in space are fine. However, the state party to the treaty has an international responsibility for the things that they do. So it's not just, you know, carte blanche. And that obligation, that responsibility is met by the state party, the government, authorizing, so saying, yes, it's okay to go, and supervising, so some sort of ongoing relationship, monitoring for compliance, those activities. So that was pretty straightforward for a long time, you know, as things in the US, but also around the world started developing. You know, launch has very developed law here in the US, but also in other places. And telecommunications, I mentioned that's been around for a while, so very developed, you know. The ITU is very developed. The different countries have their organizations, like we have the Federal Communications Commission here in the US, and then also Earth observation, remote sensing. So we also, these things develop by themselves. But there's all sorts of new things that we're starting to get into. There's things like in space assembly and manufacturing, creating, you know, infrastructure in space, 3D printing in space, using resources like regolith to do that 3D, which is like moon dust and moon sand, to do that 3D printing. And those things are not launch, they're not telecommunications, they're not remote sensing. So right now we're working on a whole of government response. It's not the first time that the United States government has tried to, you know, sort of figure out a way forward that is flexible enough to grow, because we can only imagine what kinds of things, what kind of crazy ideas we're going to be talking about 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And we want to, you know, put a system in place that's clear and predictable, because the investment community needs that, we need that. And at the same time is flexible enough to grow with us. And because we now have this awareness of things like space traffic coordination and sustainability, the fact that it's not just for now, it's for you know, generations to come, and that I will suggest to you that there's another article in the Outer Space Treaty that deals with all of that, and that's Article 9. We are looking at ways that we can sort of bake those sustainability issues and awareness in as well. And the vice president is keenly into this. So she's taken a real interest in this, which is wonderful. And she has, you know, she featured it at an event that she had in California in August. It became one of the big topics at our second meeting in September in Houston. And she tasked the interagency, so all the members of the National Space Council, which are the cabinet level departments, and us, we convened this. So this is my baby. And we're coming up with a plan. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
Two women also leading. I'm getting a lot of questions, Diane.
Sure.
I was going to ask you about space tourism, because that was an issue that had come up many times, and we've seen examples now where billionaires are paying to be able to take a tour of the Earth from space. Is that under your jurisdiction, or is it under another legal framework? Because it seems that I remember going to a discussion with NASA officials, and they really wanted to develop some sort of space tourism, which I don't see in the near future, obviously, but maybe you would like to elaborate a little bit on it, and then I want to go to the questions, because there are quite a few questions coming in from
I'll try to make this brief. So human space flight. We've now moved off of talking about things in terms of space tourism because, yeah, you could just go to the edge of space and come back. It's sort of like a really fantastic bungee jump, but there's so much more. I mean, we're starting. So this is sort of the cusp between commercial space and civil space, things like space agencies, because now NASA, we're coming to the end of the International Space Station's lifetime. So we plan to be in it till 2030, but we're starting to plan ahead so that there's a good transition. And we're looking to the private sector to provide these kinds of commercial low Earth orbit destinations, is what we call them, CLDs, but they're commercial space stations by any other name. So yes, that does sit under my purview, if you will, but also it intersects with my colleague who is the civil policy lead. So right now there aren't human space, there's just a few regulations in place for human space flight. There was sort of like a learning period moratorium to sort of like let it, develop and see what technologies actually were going to be viable and which weren't, and to collect data. One of the reasons we're able to certify aviation to the degree that we are is because it's a very mature industry and we have a lot of data points. So it's very easy to sort and figure things out. So we're now
fascinating.
We now have more cadence and we're getting to that point. So that's actually one of the things that my group is looking at, is how best to put some things in place now that we're moving into this new phase of human space flight. So not just tourism is part of it, but whatever is, safe for people going to the edge of space, it should be aligned with what's safe to do orbital things and also to go and actually live and work elsewhere off Earth.
So I'm going to start with the questions because time is really running. There's a few questions about what it's like to be a woman in a leadership position in a traditional male-dominated sector. And what would be some of the advice you would give or long-term goals that you would give to any young woman looking at this field?
So I would say utilize the golden rule, treat people the way you'd like to be treated, be kind, but be firm. So I learned early on, particularly here in Washington, D.C., but even in the classroom, which is, it can be brutal, that you have to come from a good place, but be firm. And so in particular, working on some of the things that I'm working on here at the White House, I've learned to be kind, to be clear, and to be firm, but to listen. Because
do you also need mentors? Because that question comes up very often. Yes. Also, I see it in the other webinars and with the women. Did you have perhaps one or two mentors, male and female, that helped you?
Absolutely. I would say that Lucy was kind of a mentor because she gave me some very good advice, things to look into, which I did. And then I started inviting myself to things early on, and I asked people to help me. But I would say also, when you're in a position where you can then give that back, do it. So, I mean, to this day, I continue to mentor people, and I will not say no. I mean, I have to be judicious about the time that I could spend on things, but yes, mentoring is incredibly important. Absolutely.
I do have an interesting question about, are there any articles or any existing information about international space treaties that relate to providing healthcare in space? Understanding that deep space healthcare cannot rely on a flight surgeon.
So I am not aware of healthcare in space per se, but I will tell you, I mentioned that the regulations that are in place right now have to do with, medical clearance. So sort of a relationship. And I think that, some of this is the kind of things that the FAA, which is right now, that's who's working on human spaceflight safety. And so that'll be interesting to see how that develops.
Very interesting question on the Gateway lunar mission. Have you worked on policy setting for the upcoming Gateway lunar mission? If so, what did this process look like?
So that is actually more in the civil portfolio. So I am privy to some of those conversations, but not as directly involved. But it is a part of the whole Artemis, the programmatic development of the Artemis program?
There are 2 or 3 questions which I'm going to put together about women from diversity and also women of color in the space industry. Apparently, it is extremely difficult to break the ceiling and be able to hold on to a leadership position. Apparently, you talked about Kamala Harris, of course. That's a very important, actually, role model, extremely important, fascinating, and wonderful role model, I may say, also for women of color and all women. In terms of her career path. But do you see that there is much more difficulty in terms of having diversity and inclusion around the table, especially since it's still a male-oriented domain?
We're working on it. So I know that, the first Artemis is going to be where I believe it will not be Artemis 1, that will just circle and come back. But Artemis 2 is going to be the first woman and the first person of color that will set foot on the moon. And so there is an awareness that that's an issue, and there is a commitment to changing that. And I will tell you that more and more you're starting to see people, women for sure, but women of color as well. Our chief of staff is an absolutely fantastic role model, woman of color. My colleague who works in the Office of Science and Technology Policy here at the White House, another really fantastic woman of color. And I mean, there are NASA, like Johnson Space Center is Vanessa, I can't remember, Wiki, she runs the show. So more and more you're seeing women in positions of power and women of color as well. That again, I said it was better. It doesn't mean that we're all the way there, but more and more it's better.
Well, I know you talked also about making sure that you help one another.
Absolutely.
So I think that is absolutely been in my experience also. I mean, you open the door, but you make sure others enter that door. Also at the same
check
time.
back with them. Yeah,
yes,
check back with them for sure. Absolutely. And it never hurts to tell somebody after the fact, wow, I saw you. You did a great job. I had that experience yesterday. I was at a local conference and I was on a panel, and then I stayed for the panel after me. And a young woman who I had mentored when she first came to DC a number of years ago, and we had lunch and she picked my brain, and she was like taking some space law classes, and there she was up there, she's like, working as, in the legal department of a company, and she's all grown up, and she was fantastic. And I went up to her afterwards and I said, wow, look how far you've come. I think we need to make it a point to give each other props.
To celebrate
Absolutely.
Also everyone's accomplishments. I totally agree. I have a very interesting question also. Was there ever an exciting opportunity that was presented to you where you had to turn down? You did talk earlier about knowing your heart and your mind, but also having a moral compass. I wonder if those 2 things are aligned.
They are, and there have been, I don't know that it's an exciting opportunity that I had to turn down, but there have been times when I weighed out an opportunity against either a responsibility that I was already committed to, or I just, as exciting as it sounded, I just didn't think it was the best fit. And so I held out. So.
Have you had any regrets about something you have turned down that today you would not turn down? No.
And I equally, I have no regrets about the things that I've the positions I've left, not having something already in the hopper. Just because I knew it was time, I left. So I was teaching at Embry-Riddle for a number of years. I went there to start a program for commercial space operations, a multidisciplinary program, and I developed the whole space law and policy track. Great opportunity. I got to write all these courses. It was fantastic. But I got to a point where I just knew I wasn't growing, and I just felt like there was more that I could do. I knew I wanted to come to DC, and I had a sense of what was going to be coming online here. And I knew this was I created this position. It was a great opportunity for another, upcoming space lawyer. And I just walked away. I helped get her, I helped her get hired and moved on. And my position here in DC hadn't yet been solidified. No regrets at all. No.
I have to interrupt a little bit and say that Marie Lucy actually sent a note that I wanted to read out to you. I must sign off from this terrific discussion. Please tell Diane it was a pleasure to see her. She's an inspiration. Her journey since we first met back in the summer of 2003 is simply amazing. A true example of resilience and determination and serendipity. So we're sorry to see you go, but it was wonderful that you could join us. I'd like to do a rapid fire questions at the moment, because there are no, I'll go back to one or two other questions if our participants would like to continue to send their questions. We still have a little bit of time. So Diane, what's your favorite star or constellation?
Ah,
hard question.
It depends on what hemisphere you're in. But
well, let's say the hemisphere you're in right now.
I would say, I like Ryan. I'm Diana, goddess of the moon and the hunt. So I like Ryan.
Like Ryan. What's your favorite planet?
And right now, I mean, anything that I look at that the James Webb Telescope has given us, I fall in love with each one I see more and more. I mean, those aren't really constellations; they're more like galaxies.
They're all unique.
And
yeah, they're all unique, and we're seeing some amazing photographs of other universes out there. I mean, with the I forgot the name of the telescope right now, but it's amazing.
James Webb.
Type of James Webb. Absolutely incredible. From your first career in fashion design, what's your favorite designer?
Oh gosh, I love Stella McCartney. I will always love Chanel.
Classic.
Yeah,
classic.
So yeah, I like Anna Sui a lot. Very quirky.
Thank you. Do you have a favorite science fiction series?
Well, I love Dune. I can't watch Dune enough. And yeah, and I do practice the voice from time to time, the Beneath voice. The Left Hand of Darkness is a fantastic book.
I don't know that one.
Okay. Yeah, and it's been around for a while. That's one of my favorites for sure. I just recently revisited Robert Heinlein. Always interesting.
Yes.
And I don't think we always think of Ray Bradbury as a science fiction writer, but he is sort of,
I agree.
Magical realism, and I love Ray Bradbury as well.
What's your favorite book or novel that you could recommend to young women that inspired you?
Oh,
that's hard.
No, there's a book by Anthony Doerr. I just read another Anthony Doerr book. Amazing author. Anything he writes is fantastic. But I think it's called All the Light We Cannot See.
Oh yes.
And it's a World War II story, and it's beautiful, beautiful. But the one I just finished was Cloud Cuckoo Land, and I loved it.
Oh wonderful. So there's a recommendation for our participants. I have another question, which is kind of interesting also, because we always are talking about balancing your private life with your professional life. And I had to deal with that when I was first elected, because my children were very young, 1.5 and 3.5. So I'm wondering about the role of motherhood and how balancing career and family life has affected your past, and if you've faced any challenges in parenting that have had an outcome in your career. Very good question.
Well, that's a great question. So I have to tell you, my daughter did not love it when I was in the fashion industry, because I was gone a lot. I mean, and as I moved up the ranks with one company in particular, I ended up, splitting my time between Los Angeles and South Florida. And so that was rough. And she, it was before we had video chats, and that was very difficult. And she, as a teenager, did resent the fact that I was gone a lot. The fact that when I was not working, I was all hers, like for, weeks on end, that, I thought, doesn't that make a difference? So that was a hard balance to effect. Now that she's a mom herself, and she and a working mom, and she understands things differently, it's made for some very good conversation and a lot more insight from both of us to one another. I will tell you that the job I have right now, we try to help each other within my team here find that work-life balance part. But I don't really have as much work-life balance as probably I should. Partly because, you know, I live by myself, and I had 2 puppies that kept me grounded, and they got very old and they ultimately passed away within the last year. So I talk to my plants. This is how I try to keep that. I have a wonderful, you know, group of very good friends. Particularly, I have a group we call ourselves like a little posse of space ladies that are, you know, all relatively accomplished. Everybody's very accomplished and very supportive of one another, and that's been very helpful to kind of counterbalance. But my grandchildren are an enormous source of comfort to me. So, and they all have tablets, and, you know, there's 3 of them. They have tablets and laptops and phones, and so I'm giving them cooking lessons on Google Meet, and it's a good thing. So that's my social life, is my plants and my grandchildren.
I think it's important also that you talked about a group of friends, because I found that was very useful for me after I ended up leaving politics, that I needed to have a group of friends who we could get together. And it was even more important during the pandemic, I find. So it is important to have a support group, even during your career, and especially after your career. I had a very interesting question. What is your view, the expiry date or age for serendipity? Women's choices at times delay our paths.
I don't know.
Wow.
I think, you know, if something keeps cropping up, you pay attention to it, you know, so I don't think it expires. You know, my experiences have been relatively circular in life, you know, and things that I, you know, have ignored, they come back and they bite me. And, you know, really, I thought I kind of gave up on having a career in space when the Navy said, nah, you not you. Nah. But, you know, as soon as I saw the open, so I don't think there is an expiration date. And, you know, I'm getting on in years, and yet I think that there is still going to be opportunities. My current position has, you know, won't go on forever. I'm a political appointee, so it won't go on forever. However, I have every reason to believe that this door might close, but another one will open.
Do you intend to go back to academia, perhaps, and teach?
Even while I'm here, it's interesting. White House Counsel has allowed me to maintain my ties with academia. I just waive compensation so that there's no ethical complication. However, I did create another interdisciplinary program with my friend Marie Bajaj, who just won a MacArthur Genius Grant, I might say, but over at UT Austin. So we've put together another program that involves the College of Engineering and the College of Public Policy and the law school. And I teach 1 course a year, usually in spring. And so I think I'll continue to do that. Yeah.
Well, thank you. We're not going to take any more questions, because I'd like to pass the floor over to Susan Zarnowski, who's the director and who was past president of the McGill Women's Alumnae Association, and who was very much involved in our 130th anniversary scholarship and one of the first donors to that scholarship. So Susan, over to you, and I'll be back to wrap up.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. This was really exciting. I'm sitting here on the edge of my chair making notes about things that were, I mean, space is where it is now, right? I mean, when I was starting out in my aged life, it wasn't much of a thing. And now I'm just so excited that McGill is part of it. And I'm excited that we can reach out to people and make it possible. And that's why we made our new scholarship be for women in STEM. And that was very important that we keep it going. And we are, offering to everyone here the chance to make a donation to this scholarship. It is to entering students who are women students who are in the STEM fields. And I want to give a shout out to the person who was the co-chair with me. The alumni decided at their 130th anniversary year that they wanted to raise the $100,000 that it takes to make a scholarship. And this is no mean feat. And we ran with it. I think I could say that we got all board members involved. We got our friends involved. People probably tired of listening to us talk about it, but it was exciting. And we made the goal, and we've actually made over 100, I think it's $45,000 now. I have that written here somewhere, but anyway. So we are looking to people to continue to donate to it. $146,000 I have here, 530 donors so far. But if we can still intake funding because it will simply boost the security of this to make it an unending ability for us to keep the scholarship in perpetuity, which is what we would really love to be able to see. And so thank you to everyone who donated. Perhaps people in the audience were aware of it and have donated before. We would also love to see more donations come in. And I think the chat link has been put in the chat to our way you can donate to the scholarship. So back to you, Eleni.
Thank you so much, Susan. And I also want to do a shout out for Anelia Wright, who was also co-chairing the 130th anniversary scholarship, and to all the members. And of course, as the president of the board said, that we did receive an honorarium from the MWAA for our efforts. Diane, it's been an absolute pleasure. We could have done this for 3 hours, 4 hours, and I know it was difficult to try to combine all your knowledge and your journey into the 25 or 30 minutes, or even the hour, including the questions that we addressed to you. But it's been a real pleasure. I'm amazed of how much you have managed to accomplish in your lifetime, and I know there are great things coming even further. And maybe one day you'll be one of those people who will be on that flight to the moon. I hope so. One way or the other. Thank you very much. But I want to do mention again that there is a link for the 130th anniversary scholarship. I do want to also say to everyone listening that I like some of the key, I'm going to take away a few of the key elements of I want to call you Dr. Diane Howard. I think it's a title you earned, and it's not used very often. And there are so few women also, especially in that field that you're in, who have reached that Dr. Diane Howard title. Life is not linear. Never set a straight path. There are always forks on the road, as our great poet also said, who I love very much, Frost. You took the path that was less traveled, and I know many of us have, but it's never linear. Also count on your moral compass. Use your heart, but also your brain, but know what the inner voice is telling you. And that's been something a lot of us sometimes forget. And show up. Absolutely show up. Be fearless. I always tell people, be fearless about what you want. Say, you have nothing to lose by saying what your desire is. Obviously, you work hard to achieve it, but at the same time, say it. Tell somebody, tell a mentor, tell a superior, and help one another. It's so important that we as women help each other achieve our dreams and our goals. And you have done that. You have done that, Diane. And I thank you so much. I'm so pleased that you were able to make time for us. And it's been an amazing discussion. I do want to also mention that there are a number of activities taking place during homecoming week. I hope that you will take advantage and that you will enjoy the rest of the homecoming celebrations. And you will find those very much in the events calendar of McGill. So I thank everyone for attending, and thank my fellow board members from the MWAA for again giving me this opportunity to moderate homecoming. Thank you, everyone, and be well. And thank you, Diane. It's been a real pleasure.